More torque, increased use and heavier weights mean that we need more stability, more durability, puncture protection and of course grip on our e-bike tyres. But how on earth do you choose what type of tyre to get? This is our fundamentals into tyre choice. We're going to cover everything from width, tyre compound, tread pattern, weight and much more. Tread comes in an incredibly diverse range of patterns from shallow to deep. In simple terms, the deeper the tread, the better that tyre cuts into the dirt. Now, if you don't venture very far from smooth double track, then a shallow tread pattern is going to be pretty good for you. However, if you really get off into the loam, into that deep dirt, then you do need a more aggressive tread pattern on your tyre. Now, if you look at this wet weather tyre, you'll see a far greater spread of the knobs on the tyre, and that helps to disperse the mud far easier, whereas a dry weather tyre has got quite closer tread pattern to it. Also worth noting about tread is that very often on dry weather tyres, the front part of the knobs will have an angle on them for roll-in ability, whereas the rear edge of the tread is more angular, which helps with braking. What I also want to point out is that a 2.6 to 3 inch tyre, even with a shallow tread profile, has an incredible amount of grip under braking. And that's because the way the tyre flattens out and profiles and digs into that dirt. But the bottom line when it comes to e-bike tyres, that rear tyre, you have to have some bite there if you want to take advantage of those climbs. Right, let's get into the nitty gritty, the detail of e-bike tyres and the choices you've got. Now first up, it needs to be climate specific and definitely terrain specific. We've got three main broad types. We've got dry weather, wet weather and an intermediate tyre. This then is a great example of a dry weather tyre. Let's have a look at the characteristics. First up, it's got a great round profile to it, which means you can lean this into corners all day long. Helped of course by that really good aggressive side knob to it. Once we're talking about the tread pattern, you'll see it's quite raised, which means it's great under braking, and also it pulls you up those climbs because of that great edge to it. Weighs in about 900 grams to a kilo, so it's quite a relatively lightweight tyre. Nevertheless, it's quite hard wearing at the same time. What's its downfalls? Well, maybe if you're really kind of charging into very hard terrain, big rocks and roots, you do need that bigger sidewall support on the tyre. At which point you might want to choose a dry weather downhill tyre. This comes in about 1300 grams and it's a far softer compound to it, which means it really is full-on downhill competition stuff. What you really need to bear in mind with a softer compound tyre is that it's going to suck about 20 to 40 watts more power on your e-bike battery. So if you're going for a 1 hour full-on loop with loads of downhills, this is a great tyre to choose. Whereas if you're going for a bigger day out ride, you'd really need to be looking at the harder compound tyre. Wet weather tyres. I love these tyres simply because I seem to use them for much of the season. What are the characteristics? Well, as you can see, a really aggro profile to it, really raised tread pattern. And what these do, they really dig into the dirt all year long. Now what people forget is that you can actually run a good tyre like this as if it's in dry, dusty conditions, as long as you put maximum confidence into the tyre. They weigh in about 1300 grams, and remember, they're usually soft compound, so like the dry weather soft compound tyre, it's going to have quite a drain on your battery. But guaranteed, wet conditions, 1 hour loops, in the wet, this tyre will grab you every day of the week. Now the only downside of a full-on wet weather tyre is because of that really aggro tread pattern, the raised profile of those knobs, is that when you get involved with rocks and roots, they do become a little bit of a handful. They get hooked up with the edges and kind of put you offline a touch. At which point you might want to consider an intermediate tyre, such as this one here. So what do I mean by intermediate? Well, if we roll in the dry weather, which we discussed earlier, you'll see that the dry weather tyre has quite a round profile to it, whereas the wet weather is quite square edge. And obviously, like I mentioned, it's quite a high tread pattern. The intermediate tyre, nevertheless, is kind of in between the two. It's still square edged, yet it's got a lower tread pattern. So if we discuss this tyre in more depth, its strengths are that you can still ride in wet, muddy conditions primarily because the tread pattern and also the compound. However, if you get into rocky, rooty conditions, this is a far more easy tyre to manage in these situations. Weight-wise, again, it's about 1,300 grams, and like I mentioned earlier, because of the soft compound, it'll have a bigger drain on your battery, about 20 to 40 watts more than a hard compound tyre. Tyre width. Now, mountain bike tyres range from about 2 inches, such as this one, up to about 2.5, 2.6, at which point they go into plus size category, 2.6 to 3 inches. Now, obviously, the wider tyre is going to give you more braking ability and better traction under climbing. Now, I believe that a 2.6 inch tyre is a really good option for an e-bike for many respects. First up, that width is going to give you traction on those climbs, but more importantly, the volume is going to mean it's a very comfortable ride, particularly in beaten up ground, big rocks, big roots. For example, if you were to take a worn out 2.3 inch tyre and then fit a 2.6 inch tyre on a trail centre with loads of square edge rocks, the difference in speed and comfort is incredible. Tyre compound is a huge subject for e-bikes, primarily because of the drain that the soft compound has on your battery. Now, if we look at non-e-bikes, the categorization tends to be harder compounds for cross-country riders, soft compound for downhill riders, whereas the enduro rider is always looking at that compromise between rolling ability and grip. Now, I think the same rules apply to an e-bike as they do an enduro rider. You want low rolling resistance, which means you're going to have less drain on your battery, but at the same time, you want a reasonable amount of grip. But I think the main thing is don't go for too soft a compound because you want to get a bit of wear out of that tyre. You don't want that tyre to wear out too quickly. So as you can see, the difference in diameter between each of these tyres is quite significant. The Hillbilly DH27 by 2.5 comes in at 710mm diameter. The Purgatory 2.8, that's on a 275 wheel as well, comes in at 720. Then we move up to the ground control 3-inch tyre at 737mm, and then move in wheel size to 29.2.4 Bontrager SE4 at 747mm outside diameter. Now, if you swapped the Hillbilly at 710 to the SE4 at 747, that's a 37mm change in the bottom bracket, and that's a huge number. So you really don't want to be going under about 340mm on your bottom bracket height. So definitely check the height of your tyres. Now, if you're suffering a lot of pinch flats or flats in general, Tubeless is certainly one option to choose. In fact, it's the only option. If you look at World Cup downhill riders who go through a lot of impacts, big collisions, about 90% of them choose the tubeless route. So it's simply so reliable. So how do you do it? Well, quite simply, we kind of choose a tubeless tyre and fit it to your rim. Alternatively, get a tubeless conversion kit, and don't forget to get some sealant, and boom, you're in business. Now, plus size tyres, we're talking about 2.6 to 3 inch, have been a bit of an enigma over the last few years. And a lot of people say you should be running like super low pressures between 12 and 15 PSI. Now, whilst that's okay for super light riders around 50 kilos, if you're heavier, they really will have a negative impact on the ride. And that's because the bigger tyres generally have thinner sidewalls. So what tends to happen was you load them hard into corners and they tend to collapse and get a little bit out of shape. So if you're riding a 2.6 to 2.8 and 3 inch tyre, you should really be on about 20 PSI, not on those low 10 to 15 PSI range. However, if you're on a heavy duty downhill tyre with a heavy casing, soft compound, my recommendation is between about 26 front and about 28 on the rear. And finally, it's worth talking about the philosophy of wheel and tyre size. Now, Canyon created a bit of a stir recently when they launched their Spectral On e-bike by designing it to use a 29-inch wheel up front and a 27.5 on the rear. Now, this kind of goes in line with a lot of motorcycle technology over the past 100 years, where they run a 21 up front and a 19 or an 18 at the rear. Does it work? Yes, it does, so long as it's matched with good rim geometry and tyre dimensions that go with that bike. And in Canyon sense, they got it bang on. They got a 30mm rim up front, 35mm rim at the rear. And what this does, that enables the rear to really dig in to get that traction on the climbs, yet the 29-inch wheel up front allowed for good rollover through the rocks. Now, other companies have taken a different approach to the dual wheel size simply by fitting different height tyres, a big tall tyre up front and then a shallower tyre on the rear, critically with a thin tread pattern. Now, whilst this might change the geometry of the bike and enable the bike to turn quicker in the corners, critically, that thin tread pattern on the rear fails to take advantage of the climbing potential of e-bikes. So tyres, a huge amount to choose from. I think the bottom line is learn to fine-tune your tyre choice, what suits you, your riding style, and the climate and riding conditions that you're riding. One last thing is maybe invest in a good tyre pressure gauge to get those pressures bang on. So if you want to see more videos such as how to set up your cockpit, have a look up here. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this video and click here to subscribe.